Hello, YouTube. This is Coach Ted. This is my first YouTube video, actually, so I hope you bear with me a little bit. I'm going to have some stutters and pauses, but I'll do my best. So I'm going to talk about resistance band training today, or super bands, as they are often referred to. They're a very important and useful tool that can be used for various things, as far as strength training your glutes, just training your body in general. I'm going to break them down and talk about theory and training and how they can be useful and applied, but also how they can be negative. Basically, resistance bands, they're an awesome tool to implement in your training. They do have a lot of benefits, but they also have a lot of negatives. One of the main factors to continue to get stronger and build more muscle is a term called progressive overload. What progressive overload states is that it is necessary to slowly and incrementally increase your resistance in order to continue to prevent your body from adapting to the training protocols that you're using. In one of my recent posts, I talked about how important it is to allow your body to adapt to specific movements over a period of time. Roughly 65% of the population tends to adapt to specific training modalities, whether that be a specific pathway, so an exercise, performing the same exercise such as a neutral grip pull-up or a chin-up over and over and over again. So obviously those are two different methods that you can choose to alter your training in order to prevent yourself from adapting to these training protocols. It's important to not repeat these protocols for various reasons. Number one, your body's going to adapt, as I mentioned, and in doing so, you're going to stop accomplishing gains, whether those be hypertrophy, so muscle building gains, or strength gains. In strength can be kind of limited in the use of bands, but you are able to adapt and build a little bit, especially if you're just starting off. So usually when you just begin your training, your body is, your nervous system is adapting to the training and it's just getting more efficient. So initially you're going to get a lot stronger right off the bat just by performing push-ups or rows or pull-ups or squats, etc. But it is important in order to continue progressing that you make these exercises more challenging. And one great thing about resistance bands is that they come in many different strengths and sizes and tensions. So it's important to use everything to your advantage. So once people surpass this 6, basically you'll continue to make progress until about 6 to 8 repetitions of a particular exercise. So it's good to continue to perform an exercise. You're going to get the most progress out of that. If you stop performing or you perform a new exercise every time you go into the gym, you're actually not going to adapt very much. You will continue to get stronger, but it's going to be incredibly slow in comparison to allowing yourself to perform an exercise for about 6 to 8 total rounds. And then you want to switch up your exercises. So what tends to happen, not only do you stop progressing, but your body will basically start to overuse those specific pathways. So you can develop things such as tendonitis, bursitis, shin splints, for example. If you're running over and over again and you just started and you don't slowly adapt, you can obtain hairline fractures. Your body will start to fatigue and it won't recover. So it's important to make sure, number one, you take some rest every once in a while, but also it's important to make sure that you change your modalities, you change your exercises occasionally. So repeat them, but not too often. So for example, 6 times, 8 times is going to be about right for, once again, about 65% of the population. Some people will actually adapt after 12 times. Some people will adapt after 2 times. However, the last statistic I heard for single session adaptations is about 7% of Olympic caliber athletes. So even beyond that, that's probably about 0.5% of the world's population will adapt in one session to a specific training protocol. So it's important to keep repeating over and over again, but once again, not too often. With resistance bands, obviously the same rules apply. In order to continue making adaptations, also known as strength gains or hypertrophy gains, muscle building, for example, it is important to occasionally change up the exercises. The variety of exercises you have access to with bands truly depends on creativity and or your ability to just search the internet. So you can find anything on the internet. The internet's an amazing tool. In fact, I try and post some exercises, and if anybody has questions about exercises, maybe I'll post a couple resistance band exercises you can perform that are going to be ideal for you. But resistance bands, so they can be a strange subject. Basically, at the initiation of a movement using a resistance band, depending on the thickness of the band, it is often very easy. But as you get to the end range of a specific exercise, because the resistance band is limited in its length, as you get further, you start to stretch that band further and further apart, it's going to get incredibly more challenging. So certain movements are ideal for this, such as a chest press. Usually we have a sticking point or a weakness about halfway up the movement, but it gets tremendously easier as we get towards the end range of that movement. Same thing applies for, say, a squat or a deadlift, for example. Some deadlifts, some people have issues with the deadlift locking out at the top, whereas some people have issues at the very bottom of the movement. So it just depends on the person as well, and the muscle and the leverages. So someone who's a little taller is going to have a disadvantage with the deadlift, but a slightly greater advantage with the squat. However, the moment arm and everything, the resistance will change, and the area that you feel the movement will change on a squat depending on the height of the person as well. But other exercises are ideal for resistance bands, such as a row variation. I think I mentioned a chest press or a pull down variation. But other exercises, because you get more weak and the muscles can't handle loads at a greater range of motion, such as a overhead press. So when performing an overhead press with the resistance band, you're actually at a greater risk for injuring yourself towards the top end of the movement. So it's very important to be cautious with using resistance band in certain modalities. However, because it's very important to continue to overload yourself, or actually because we get stronger at the end ranges of motion at certain movements, like I mentioned, the squat and the bench press, you're actually going to activate more musculature at the top of the movement with a greater resistance. So a resistance band is actually going to help you get stronger and build more muscle at those end ranges, whereas it's going to put you at a greater risk for injury at the end range of a overhead press. So moving on from that, let's see. So they can be also, resistance band can be a great tool for assisting with pull-ups and chin-ups, for example. However, in the last about half a year or so, I've started to kind of sway away from using resistance band as an assistance tool for pull-ups. They can be useful, however, with many athletes, especially female athletes, not limited to female athletes, the initiation of a pull-up, so at a dead hang, which is very important, so it's important to put yourself through a full stretch on the muscle you're working, so you're working your lats back in this area here. On that pull-up, it's important to stretch that out as you initiate a movement in order to recruit more musculature, which is obviously going to help you get stronger. It's going to help you lift more weight. It's going to help you build more muscle, break more muscle down, which is basically the purpose of trying to build muscle, also strength training, but more particular trying to build muscle, you got to break that muscle down. So we got to activate more muscle with each movement. But because the bottom of that movement tends to be very, very challenging, especially for those female athletes, the resistance band obviously makes that part of the movement the easiest. And although that sounds like it might be incredibly useful or helpful, it doesn't allow the person to build the strength at that end range of the movement. So it's important to also perform exercises such as scapular pull-ups, where you're just basically shrugging. You're trying to lock your shoulder blades back and down without actually initiating arm movement. So I'm not really bending my elbow there. I'm just locking my shoulder down. And that will allow me to start the initial movement with the correct musculature with the pull-up, and therefore that can help you build some strength at the bottom of the movement. But once again, that resistance band is going to be very limiting, and it's going to prevent you from getting stronger at that lower range of the movement. So I actually prefer eccentrics and isometric pauses with pull-ups when strength training. So at the top of the movement, you're building the strength of the movement, or the strength in the musculature that you use for the pull-up just by holding yourself. So I like to have my athletes build strength for 30 to 60 seconds at that movement. Once they get to that point, then I like to progress them to eccentric, so slowly lowering. And it's important to lower through the full range of the movement in a pull-up, because if you don't train that bottom again, then you're just continuing to keep yourself weak in that movement, and it's going to make it impossible to continue to get strong there. So with resistance bands, they're awesome because they have varying thicknesses. So you can start very, very, very thin. You can work at little tiny, I think they call it shoestring bands, where you can work exercises like rotator cuff exercises and stuff like that. So obviously those are very weak and small muscles. Sorry for my dog barking in the background. But as you get stronger, or you're progressing to different exercises, you have slightly thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker bands. I think they make up to 3-inch bands potentially, which are often used for powerlifting or something like that. I like to use some very thick bands for some strength training, especially with glutes. In performing deadlifts with those bands, you can find ways of attaching them to different positions or your feet and holding them or locking down the shoulder or something like that. So in conclusion, it's important to change up your modalities, number one, but it's also important to make sure that you perform the correct exercises. So once again, you can look up different exercises online. I will attempt to post some, but it's important to train various ranges of movement. So it's important to train a horizontal press, a horizontal pull. So horizontal press could include a bench press, for example. A horizontal pull will include a row. A vertical press, so an overhead press, you'll want to once again be very cautious with the movement that you're performing or the band that you're using, or it might even be better to just pick up a rock and just do that if you're limited on the tools that you have access to, or you can perform a vertical pull, so pull down, or a pull up. So bands can be used for pull ups, pull downs. So you can attach it to a fixed point up at the top and then proceed to perform your pull down. You can also perform both a hamstring exercise as well as a quadriceps based exercise. So front of the legs and back of the legs are very important to train. So you can perform a quadriceps based exercise such as a squat or a split squat. You can use a band for those movements. You can perform a deadlift or a Romanian deadlift where you're hip hinging in order to hit the hamstring muscles, and you can use bands for both of those if you're kind of creative as far as how you fix those positions. You can attach them to your feet, hold on to them with your arm, strap them around your shoulder or your neck, but be very cautious with the neck. You always want to be very careful. So I personally, I would either not recommend it, or I would recommend you practice safely first and you progressively increase the resistance on that, so you're at lesser risk for injuring yourself. So if you have any questions about anything I mentioned in this video, I apologize for the super long video. I think it's about 12 minutes now at this point. Please feel free to comment, inquire with my email address, or contact me through my phone number, which is available on my webpage, YouTube, Twitter, all that good stuff. So if you have any questions, let me know. I hope you have a great day. Once again, Coach Ted, have a good one. Bye.